So my name is Sue Wright. I'm an anthropologist and I'm Professor of Educational Anthropology at the Danish School of Education in Copenhagen, which is part of Aarhus University. And my interest as an anthropologist is in people's engagement with large-scale processes of political transformation. And that interest started right back with my PhD in Iran, where I was studying the impact of state policies on that were settling nomads. And I studied this up a mountain in Iran, as remote as you could get, a classical kind of anthropological site, and was looking at the way in which the Shah's modernizing state was affecting people in that location. It was a very repressive and oppressive regime, but it also had education programs and health programs that were arriving day by day as I was sitting there watching them arrive. And the interesting thing for me was that these people were not just reacting to changes in the state, they were also being proactive. And that included building a model village where they tried to presage the kind of polity and the kind of social relations they would like to live in when the revolution came. Everyone knew there would be a revolution, we didn't know how or when. And I learned two things from this research, really. One was, well, three. One was that the big picture counts, the big picture of the Shah's modernization policies, which usually weren't part of an anthropological study at that stage, were very, very important. The second thing was I learned from the people that I was living with that everything you do has an impact. And everything, they thought of everything as political, with the smallest p. That whatever you do, however you interact with people, however you position yourself within debates or disputes, is affecting the society you're in, it's affecting the institutions that you're part of, and ultimately affects the state. And that was mind-blowing to me, that these very, very remote, very marginalized people felt that way. And the third thing that I learned from them was that the contest between the top-down ideas of a modernizing state and their own ideas of the polity that they wanted to create really hinged on contestations over keywords. And these were not just the meanings of the keywords, but the way of seeing and acting in the society that these keywords implied. And I suppose I've taken those lessons with me through my career. I went back to England, and in 1979 there was, well, they called it an election, and we had Mrs. Thatcher starting what I call a revolution in England, with an enormous change in the state, in the very idea of what the role of government was, root and branch reform of public institutions and their management, and a change in the idea of how people should conduct themselves as citizens and workers. It was a thoroughgoing change that swept through Britain over the next 10, 15 years. So I studied this, and I've studied it in a variety of places and sites, and ultimately realized, or rather slowly realized, that actually my own position in the university was one of the important sites where this revolution was happening. Both because the university is a public institution and they were subject to the big reforms of public institutions, but also because the university is a site where the government was seeing us producing the future citizens and workers of the country. So there were two ways in which we were affected by these big changes. So I studied these, combining both the big picture of the large-scale picture of the reforms of what was going on, and also looking at the detail of everyday life in the university, and realised that keywords were really important hinges on which those big picture and small picture things came into conflict or relationship. One of them, for example, was the idea of the government asked us to change our teaching so that we produced reflexive workers. And that was a key word in anthropology, reflexivity. And I realised that rather than my idea of reflexivity, which was to think of how you're positioned within a society, within interactions in everyday life, and then using what I'd learnt from Iran, that is political, and that how you deport yourself in those situations is actually changing the society that you're living in. So how do you want to use your own positioning to create the society you want to inhabit? That was my idea of reflexivity. No, the government's idea of reflexivity was that students should get to understand the demands of industry around them and then think how to change themselves to meet the demands that were being made on them. So there were two totally different ideas of reflexivity with different ideas of the society that it would generate. That was just an example of the way these key words to me play an important role. So fast forward, I've worked in a whole range of ways, looking at the anthropology of policy, looking at the interactions between the top-down ideas of policy and people's own engagement with policy, working with Chris Shaw on that, in a whole range of projects, and ultimately come to the UNIKE project. And here, this is really confronting the latest of the big pictures of what should be affecting the universities. The idea that the future lies in a global knowledge economy and that universities should be reformed to drive that economy. And that as a result, the internal organisation of the university is changed, the management, the auditing, the core functions of how we do research and what we mean by teaching and how we do teaching. And the very essence of who, as academics, we are and how we should be. Those are all part of the story of the global knowledge economy. And the UNIKE project is both studying that critically, but it's also it's funded by the EU as an initial training network. And one of the aims of the initial training networks is to produce the next generation of research leaders in Europe. So this raises the other issue then of how to train a cohort of doctoral students to be reflexive practitioners, to understand that their positioning, the way they think of themselves, the way they position themselves in their interactions with each other, in their institutions, has the potential to create the institutions of the future that they want to inhabit. And that's been a big challenge, an exciting challenge of the UNIKE project. So to think about what the importance of all this is, I think it's really to combine a sense of critique with thinking about how to use that critique actively. And one of the things I've been doing alongside the UNIKE project, or during the UNIKE project, is working with some of the international partners, and especially David Greenwood, but now we've created a whole international network of partners who are thinking about how we create the university of the future that we want to inhabit. And the key word here is trust. So we're thinking about the trust university in three senses. It's like a play on that word. An ownership system in trust that avoids the university being privatized and marketized in the way that we see threatening universities at the moment. Trust in terms of the internal management and governance system of the university. So we restore trust between managers and academics and students, which is again another indicator of what's been happening. And third, trust between the university and society. The universities in the global knowledge economy are under a whole range of demands from surrounding society. And how do we both assert what the core values of the university are in those negotiations and restore a sense of trust in relationships with the range of civic and economic and political interests that want to influence the future of the university. So in those three ways, we're playing with the word trust to try and design a way of thinking about the space, the work life, and the institutional structures that we want for the future.